Thank you to the source of creation, the being of all, for being this live webinar on this Saturday morning, Saturday the 20th of January. Thank you for being everything. Thank you particularly for being those aspects of our own intelligence that support our ability to rise into our dharma, to rise into our full potential and our full capabilities as humans, and to heal our bodies and to heal our lives, to heal everything that needs to be healed for ourselves and for the whole world. Thank you for being the ancestors. And thank you to them for their loving support and their presence and their lively awareness, all the information that they provided to allow us to ride around in these marvelous machines, our bodies. Thank you to the divine in all of us for blessing our ability today to work concisely and efficiently, to bring out the deepest, most important aspects of understanding about our today's topic and about energy healing in general. And finally, of course, the part, I can never say this part enough or long enough, but thank you to the eternal tradition of wisdom without which the flow of knowledge, the flow of knowingness would not be, and so therefore none of this. So thank you to the holy tradition. All right. So today's topic is subtle realms, dimensions, and simultaneous parallel universes, or we could also call those simultaneous virtual realities. But before I get launching on that topic in depth, it's important that I give a brief overview of what energy healing is for the newcomers and for the old comers who like to hear it again. So, energy healing is the process of focusing our awareness intelligently. Awareness is being, it's consciousness. It's the source of creation that we have the autonomy to direct with our intention. So that's like a huge thing that we can do that. And we are endowed as humans to be able to do that, and that's fantastic. The other part of that description, besides the attention part, is the intelligently part. And that's where energy healing really comes in, because all of us are directing our attention anyway, spontaneously. But intelligently, with regards to energy healing, means directing awareness in a way that extracts out the source or the seed of a problem or imbalance. So if there's a symptom on the surface we're experiencing, physical, for example, physical symptom, somewhere there was the birth of that symptom. And that's really where awareness needs to go in order to eradicate the symptom completely. So in energy healing, one of the reasons we're working with subtle realms, dimensions, and virtual realities is sometimes the seed of an imbalance doesn't sit in an obvious location. You can say, well, you know, my back hurts because I was shoveling snow yesterday and I was bending over too much with the big shovel. And that's the seed. That's why my back hurts. That's also a symptom. Also the shoveling snow, also at the relative level, because sometimes you shovel snow and your back doesn't hurt, and sometimes you shovel snow and your back does hurt. So what's the difference? The difference is that somewhere, just using backs as an example here, we tend to hide what we don't want to look at in our backs. We hide from ourselves things we don't want to look at. So the nature of the back is to be an area where when it starts to hurt, it's like, you know, you've been hiding something back here and it's too much. It's been going on for too long and you need to take a look at me. You need to give me some attention. And that's what pain is for, right? Pain brings your attention to something that needs it. So the principle here is that sometimes when you take a deeper look, like you look past the symptom and you look past what seems to be the obvious cause, which was action, which of course action is karmic. Like, why were you out there at that particular time? Maybe you could have warmed up, done some stretching warm-up exercises before you went out to shovel or something, but you didn't, you know, things like that. So overall, the point is that we want to look past everything, every cause we can find for that illness until we can look no further. And that's basically the technology for finding the seed. You look and, you know, you can look at the obvious reasons and then the less obvious reasons and the subtler reasons and then the very abstract reasons till you get to that one that's like, oh, wow. A long time ago, I quit honoring the energies in my hips or something, you know. On some level, there's an energy there that wants to be addressed. Something crying, there's crying, and there's almost always, it's something abstract, like it's a discordant feeling. You can feel the crying feeling in it. When you feel that crying feeling, then you know, oh, that's what was bothering me. All right. So, especially if you try to look beyond that, you can't find anything, then you know. All right, so that's the example. That's what energy healing is. Today, what I'm doing is helping by giving verbal expression to the landscape so we know where we're looking. We're not just fumbling around in the dark looking for seeds, but we can actually have a map. So I'm also using the map. We're going to use, this isn't just Dorothy spouting information, but actual experience, that we want to go from the level of experience. So with our group, we've got a very nice big group. The webinars are getting larger, so we've got a very nice big group with us today. And so I'm just going to feel my awareness. I'm going to direct my awareness intelligently into the group, into all of the spaces that we're occupying, the spaces of the hearts. Because the heart is like a central, in many ways, there's a central hub there that organizes and coordinates the rest of the being. Look for a healing from yesterday's session about that. And as I look, all I'm doing is providing what I see to the silent source of my own being. I look and silence. Just the silence of being, the source of looking, the source of awareness flow. And as that happens, for me, I'm experiencing it happening kind of over and over and over again in multiple waves. And so the waves start to build up layers of orderliness and coherence in our group session. It starts to build a kind of a healing ethos, a kind of a healing atmosphere in which all of us can reside and participate in a really effective way, in a way that's meaningful to everybody. And that's my intention, is to provide value for you guys. So my contribution, but each person has their own contribution, because once it opens up like that, everybody can, to whatever degree possible, feel the rest of our collective and feel ourselves as a healing collective. And notice the softness in the air, you could say, in the energetic space around. It increases. It's like we connect to the mother of creation, and we connect to all those aspects of our own intelligence which are specifically responsible for the healing process. So you get to know your own inner healing intelligence, like getting to know a long-lost family member or a friend. You get to know the part of yourself that heals you in a way that's very intimate. And that's so important for everybody's ability to master the energy healing process. So at first, again, like the seed, remember I was mentioning the seed of the illness can be very abstract. The seed of your own mastery over the energy healing process can be abstract. But what I'm doing is I'm shining my light onto that seed, and that's causing all the rest of us to shine our light there in that space as well, so that at first it may seem abstract. It just feels like maybe a little bit of lightness or a little bit of softness around you. But as we look more deeply, we discover there are details in that softness. There are details in that lightness. They're very important. Now, I know you guys. I've been working, most of you, some of you are new, but a lot of you guys, we've been doing this for a long time. Even the new ones have introduced themselves. And so we know that the general orientation of our entire group is for the highest intentions, the highest outcome for actions that are in alignment with cosmic evolution and that support our health. So already we're kind of like a step ahead. We don't have anybody in the group who's here to like create trouble or something. You know, it's just simple. It's simple. But that's why we need to lay out the landscape. Because when we go in with good intentions, we also have to cultivate or evolve our ability to work with the elements which create havoc in life. And so that's part of the strengthening that comes from these sessions. And that's part of the value of doing them as a collective. We've been doing it as a collective long enough. I'm starting to get this. Like the lights are starting to come on in the darkness, right? And one of the values of working as a collective is we have a sort of a strength in our collective. And that lets us go into darker areas and still maintain stability, maintain the flow of our responsibility and our moral structure so that we can go in and we can make things happen in an effective way. Beautiful. All right. So that's quite a bit of a recap and a sort of summary of what we're going to do today. I've got people coming in question answers and people coming in on the chat. I want to make a note. I just would like to say, this is sort of technical here, is that Zoom has changed its chat format. So when you come in on the chat, it used to be if you made a chat statement, everybody could see it. Now they can't. So the way you affect that is you go down to the bottom of your chat window and there's some options. You have an option that only panelists can see you, and I'm the only panelist, so I'm the only one who can see you if you come in on that option. Or there's another one that gives you the option to come in for attendees. So if you want to say something for all the attendees, you can do that in your chat, but you have to make an adjustment. The default is to go to the panelist. I hope that makes sense. Okay, let's see what people are saying. Oh, hellos coming in from people. Oh, yay. Oh, lovely. So that's the chat. The chats are hellos. And oh, and look, somebody's figured out how to give it to the attendees. Good job, man. Good job, everybody. Beautiful. And questions also. The first one's from my husband saying, don't forget to tell people about, oh, look, now people are throwing in their chats to everybody, their hellos to everybody. You guys are so adorable. Oh my God. So the chat box is filling up with hellos to everybody, just letting you know. These guys can't see the chat box, so I have to let them know. Beautiful. From Las Vegas, from Fairfield, from all over. Okay, so one person is asking me a question. If you have a chance, could you talk about love from Kitimat? Kitimat, what a great sounding town. She's saying, can you talk about the difference between frequency-based awareness and ratio-based awareness? Lots of love. Okay, so what I have to say about this question is, neither of these are terms with which I'm familiar. It doesn't mean I'm not familiar with the concepts, because I probably am, because the work that we're doing is in this area, so it's most likely that I am familiar, but I don't really understand what you mean by the term frequency-based versus ratio-based. So I am going to talk about, let's see, X, Y, Z. We've got X, Y, and Z axis. We need a name for the other axis, maybe A. We'll make that, we'll go back to the beginning. We'll jump across the gap at the end of the alphabet and have it.
A for awareness.
Yeah, A for awareness. It's also the begin, you know, the source, the beginning.
That's good.
Yeah, thank you. One of the landscape has been laying out as axes, and there's a y-axis that takes us from dense and concrete down to subtle and abstract and to the source of being non-manifest. So from manifest to non-manifest, that's the y-axis. There's the x-axis that takes us from hell to heaven, And there's the z-axis. We got some more axes going on here. The z-axis, which is smaller than the smallest to larger than the largest. And we can find smaller than the smallest to larger than the largest anywhere along that field. And I call that dimensions, and that's to be understood not the same as mathematical dimensions, because mathematical dimensions are like first dimension is a line, second dimension is a plane, third dimension is a cube, like that. Those aren't the dimensions we're talking about here. We're talking about dimensions from smaller, smaller, smaller dimensions, you know, like the difference between a cell versus an atom, or a cell versus an organ versus a human versus a planet versus galaxies, like that. Or, so those kind of dimensions, large to small dimensions. And then there's yet another axis, yet another axis. And last night, the suggestion was given by one of the attendees that if you have a grid that goes like this, and you flip it so that all the lines become occipital, you can bring another line out, kind of an occipital line, which essentially, we were talking about curves, how the lines can curve because they all fold back onto themselves through the premise of infinity, because they all go to infinity in different directions, right? You can get to be, even though in our human plane, it seems like there's only, we've reached the pinnacle of materialness, of density. That's actually not true, because in a black hole, for instance, things get far more dense than they do here, right? In fact, for all we know, they become infinitely dense. And then we know that at the other end of abstraction, it goes to infinitely abstract to non-manifest. And we can imagine that it can go from awful all the way down to infinitely awful, and wonderful up to infinitely wonderful, and of course infinitely small and infinitely large. And when you get to smaller than the smallest and larger than the largest, you get to infinity. So infinity kind of sits at the ends of all these different lines. So in a sense, they almost kind of loop, because it would be the same infinity. Infinity is infinity. So it would be basically the same thing. It kind of makes a loop. Anyway, the last one could apply to this particular question, which is frequency-based awareness versus ratio-based awareness, because we think of people having like awareness as higher frequency. That relates to the x-axis. The low frequency beings who function at a low frequency, that sort of lower like base awareness, like you could think of people with psychosis that are struggling with mental issues, they're struggling with a lot of internal pain, you know, very dark discordant feelings, or whose lives are oriented towards just getting whatever they can get. And that would be different from, because, you know, people who have mental challenges different necessarily from just people who are out for themselves, you know, and everybody else under the bus, kind of like that. And then they're higher frequency people who live at sort of higher frequency values, where there's some people whose whole lives are just devoted to the well-being of others. It's like the opposite, almost the polar opposite, right? So that would be like frequency-based, and that would actually determine where people sort of end up along the x-axis. Whereas ratio-based is more, thank you for the question, by the way, is more related to the a-axis, the new axis. And that has to do with levels of consciousness. That means how much awareness are we drawing through? And there can be a relationship, because, you know, as more and more awareness is being stabilized and integrated in the physiology, the tendency is, there's several things about that. One is that the physiology is part of that story. And in order to stabilize and integrate fully in the body those higher states of consciousness, it helps to have a physiology that's running more clean, because the higher states of consciousness have a purifying effect. And also the life running more clean. If one's drawing a lot of consciousness and there's a lot of awareness, and one does something that hurts somebody else, one notices it. Whereas if one is asleep, there's more sleepiness in the consciousness. Then you can do things that make trouble for others and not even realize you're doing it. think, oh, well, yeah, that I needed to do that. All right. So thank you for that amazing question. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to kind of dig through it and lay it out. Lots of awesome questions coming in today. Thank you. Last night we didn't have so many, and I've got some from here too. And there's one particularly from Europe that I don't want to miss because you guys were on last night at 3 in the morning, and I didn't even address your question then. So I'll for sure address it today. In fact, before I go to the next questions, I think I'll do these because as the answers come out, it may also answer some of the questions that are coming in the chat window. So here's the question. Since a few days, my husband is feeling like an open hole. And it's so sweet because I realize this English isn't always the first language for people in Europe. And so I like to honor that. But she wrote the word whole, not like a hole, like a gap, but like whole as in wholeness, which was so sweet because I feel that that actually is related to the answer. So bless you for that. But he feels like there's an open hole in the middle of his chest. And he feels as if he's breathing from that open space. And that the breathing is connected to the whole creation. To me, it sounds like something good. Could you please comment? There's actually a technique that involves breathing through a chakra that's behind the heart. And I think I may have briefly mentioned it in a previous webinar, I'm not sure. But when the physiology becomes so integrated with being, that what we feel of ourself isn't so much the density of the physiology, but feeling the light of the physiology. This is what's happening. He's feeling his body as pure light. And when the breathing comes in and out, he's experiencing the breath not as the physical material airflow so much, but as the life force that's in the air, the prana that's in the air flowing through the lightness, through the light of his own physiology. It's a beautiful experience. And it's an experience common for individuals whose physiologies aren't so physical. So what it means is that there's an integration taking place in this physiology with the lighter reality of self. Because, and this was a point that came out yesterday, but I think I'd like to bring it in a more concrete or more succinct way today. And that is that at any moment we experience this reality, right? We're here right now. You're sitting in front of your computers. You guys are sitting here in the living room and the recording studio, whatever. And this is the dominant reality. All the virtual, all the subtler levels of creation, all the subtler realms, all the virtual levels of creation, they're going on all the time, but we're experiencing them. We're processing that experience not so much through our gross senses, but through our subtle senses. So those realities are happening because they're virtual, there's some flexibility in them. That means they're more malleable than this reality. If I wanted to change something like say I've got my mouse, right? And I'm like, well, I like my mouse, but I want it to look like a real mouse. Well, that... Or my son the other day was like, well, Mom, can you just manifest a block of gold right here on the kitchen counter? I'm like, no, I don't think so. Not in the physical material, you know? So what I did was I looked into virtual levels of creation. I realized, well, you can't. Oh, actually, by the way, I don't want to make this into a mouse because I've actually got energetics in my house to keep mice out. Thank you very much. But anyway, that wasn't a very good example. Anyway. But anyway, like say the block of gold. I looked into the subtle levels of creation. I could see the block of gold on the counter. I could see it. I could experience it. I could watch how it could manifest up to a certain point, but then not to the full. So what that means is that there's more play. There's more flexibility over the subtle levels, the subtle realms of creation, where things can manifest, they can unmanifest, they can morph around. And that's very important for energy healing, because usually the seeds of illness sit in those levels. And so being able to manipulate them well is essential to eventually produce the effect in the physiology, which is elimination of symptoms. As far as that block of gold goes, I'm not going to be surprised if it's a matter of time delay. It's a time delay. At some point, I'll take a picture and I'll send it to you. It's just a matter of time. That's all. Because it's been structured. And the thing is, in order for it to come all the way up to the physical relative material level, it has to coordinate with the rest of creation. Because the block of gold is already somewhere. So it's like, well, how long does it take for it to get from there to get over to here? All right. The A axis, the awareness axis, round, circular. Okay, good question. The point is that it's both round and circular, because there are loops taking place at every point in creation. So there's circles really everywhere. And if we look at the physical material plane, we know that when we get out to the level of planets and solar systems and galaxies, we've got lots of circles. And if we go down to the level of, okay, I'm going to look at that chat in a minute. Oh, and we go down to the level of like atoms and electrons. We've got these nice little circular forms that are forming in very similar shapes. So that's at a physical level. Even within our physiologies, we have some shapes that are circles. We keep circles going. Even here we have circles. So being naturally makes itself into circles along this x-axis, the z-axis, excuse me, the dimensional axis. We can find places where circles dominate and also places where they don't, where lines dominate. We talked yesterday about some of the planes where lines dominate rather than circles. So consciousness is everything. It is in everything. All this physical material that we experience is an expression of that. And in finer levels, we find it circling around on itself constantly, and you get down to the finest of the finest, even the paraprakriti, the unmanifest level of consciousness. It's constantly spinning in on itself. It's endless loops, endless. So the answer is yes. But as far as the states of consciousness, the levels of enlightenment or the levels of awakening, and I hesitate to suggest specific levels, because I feel that everybody's path is unique, and that, you know, people can have flashes, can have big flashes of very awakened experience, but then it's the process of integrating it, of how well you can utilize it. Someone like a yogi in a cave in India can sit in silence and can be in Brahman consciousness, but there's a lot he's not doing in his life other than sitting in the cave, basically. I mean, his doing is on a finer level. He's maintaining the flow of the rivers and the sprouting of the flowers in springtime and things like that. The devas are also doing that. Anyway, thank you for the question. I hope that helped. Okay, another question. I love it. We've got tons of questions coming in today. This is very different from yesterday and exciting. I love it. Can you sometimes draw a picture of all these various axes and or repeat, please? Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, I know. I kind of zipped through them. And as I was zipping through, I didn't go into a lot of detail. Last night I went into detail. This one in detail, this one in detail, that one in detail, like so. So let's go through them one at a time and kind of just get a handle on what each is. The first two, you guys, all the repeat attendees are very familiar, is the y-axis. For those TM meditators, remember your bubble diagram. You've got the physical material up here, and it gets finer, 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 more delicate, more abstract, less concrete, and then we hit field of pure being. And this is the first structure of the landscape that I started with back when I very first was starting energy healing, because I realized that the symptom would appear at the surface, or sometimes mentally or emotionally, the symptom would appear, but almost always there was some kind of deeper level of some kind of mechanics of manifestation that was behind that symptom. So I knew that we were really looking at the finer realms of creation. And in order to support everyone's ability to move through those finer levels of the manifested self, to know oneself, to know one's finer levels, or just putting a little bit of attention on the senses of perception as they manifest in the three main marmas of the physiology. So we have obviously senses of perception in our head. And I did a big healing for the marmas yesterday, but I think we need to touch it again because there's so much value in it. So the marma of the head has the senses of perception that receive information directly from the environment. Electromagnetic, and they're designed to process electromagnetic information in different ways. And they connect to the sensory cortices, which then interpret that information. And then the whole thing goes through the central thalamus, which is like the switchboard. It sends the impulses and the information in the direction it needs to go. So it all comes together as a whole experience, the level of the homunculus. And then from there, there's a connection to the prefrontal cortex where the information is analyzed and synthesized. And we understand, oh, I'm sitting in front of my computer listening to Dorothy talk. Aha. So this is all the head area. So the whole head area really is oriented towards experience of the relative. The gut area, the Basti Mahamarma, is oriented towards self-identification and self-understanding of what I am experiencing this, and what is my connection to totality. And the reason is, even if we just look at the function of the gut, all those neural connections, and look at the function of the gut, that it takes the relative, it comes in here, right? So we take the food in up here, and we break it to smaller pieces, and then smaller, and then smaller, and then smaller, and then smaller. You get to the gut, and it breaks down to small enough pieces that we can look at that piece of food and say, oh, this is just myself. This is just going to go into myself. It's going to become myself. So it's transformed from being something foreign to me or outside of me or separate from me into being myself. And this is very important with regards to the spiritual or the consciousness function of the gut, because the gut is able to identify reality at finer, more delicate, more abstract levels of creation until we get to that point where it's all just the self. From the source of creation, there is no real separation. That's non-duality, right? So all the non-dualists, this is a gut function. Non-duality is a gut function. It's important, but it's 1/3 of the story. The heart is, of course, the liaison. So for everyone, in order to gain facility in reading the landscape of the y-axis, it's a healing for the gut. It's healing for digestion. It's healing for the entire hip, abdomen, hip joints for people, and abdomen and buttocks and reproductive organs. Oh, why? Because you get to the source of creation, and that's where life is born from, of course. I mean, it all ties in and makes it, our bodies are like this amazing thing, right? Like they connect us to the most abstract aspects of creation, the most non-material. Without our bodies, we wouldn't really have a map. The body's really the map. Anyway, for the abdomen and gut area, what we're doing is putting attention, and it's creating a wake up to the ability to read the cues, to learn the language, gut feelings, to interpret those gut feelings, to understand that the gut is not afraid to traverse the range of the x-axis. It's already working with the z-axis, right? Because it's taking your food and breaking it down to like basically consciousness. And from consciousness or intelligence, the intelligence of the food then becomes integrated to our own consciousness. And from there, it becomes physical body. So the gut is no stranger, man, to these two axes. It's also the foundation below the solar plexus. And the solar plexus is traditionally considered the place where we draw our power. And having the ability to traverse the range of creation is fundamental to wielding power successfully. So last night the question came up, could we elaborate just a little bit on that? Because it does tend to be a stumbling block for a lot of people who are on a sort of spiritual path or are working in the sort of New Age-ish area, that the frequency of the consciousness goes up, right? And we just want to live in a sweet, peaceful, nice environment. This darling lady sent me an article the other day about how to make a nice meditation space in your home. And it was so lovely, you know, it's like, we just want it to be nice. We don't want it to be yucky, you know? So after 40 years meditating in pretty much every conceivable location, airplanes and train stations, and with children literally bouncing on my body while I'm meditating and things like that, I can tell you that the outer condition of the meditation room has much less to do with the experience than the inner condition of the being, of the individual when they're meditating. Some of my best meditations, man, had that contrast of like roaring noise going on outside me and that incredible unquenchable silence going on inside, right? And there's like the contrast, like, whoa, cosmic. So, all right, not to debunk, you should, it's nice for everyone to have a lovely meditation room in their place. May you all. Anyway, this point from yesterday, which I came up in the discussion after the webinar. Yeah, she's saying one of her best programs was in a hotel in Las Vegas. You betcha, man. God bless Las Vegas. All right, so the point is that it's important in order to move into the areas, these axes that we're talking about. I've done this one in detail. I'm going to go back and do the others. But it's important to feel safe and to feel comfortable moving into the darker realms. Now we're talking realms here, right? Realms, axes. Also, I would say probably virtual realities as well. Virtual simultaneous parallel universes are not dissimilar from the realms. They're places where I personally, in my own discoveries, have not been able to tell the difference. So just throwing that out there. Maybe next webinar. In order to go into the areas that are dense and that are harboring a lot of malefic energy or kind of dark energy, it's important to know, to have the confidence that if needs be, I can create a little havoc myself. That's important to know. I think a lot of people are like, well, in order to evolve my consciousness, I need to be very sweet, and I need to be very soft, and I need to be like an angel, you know, and just take care of people and do good for people all the time and so forth. And I brought up the example yesterday of a lady I was working with who had been meditating since she was 4 years old, and she had been doing her Dharma her whole life, and she found herself with a horrible, horrible illness, like horrible. And that point came up because even if you do your Dharma, even if you do what you're supposed to do, and you're kind to everyone and you're good to everyone always, and you never hurt anyone, and you never are, you know, making mistakes even, it can happen that you can end up having to face some darkness. And the reason is that to harness your full potential, to be powerful, You need to be able to walk into the den of snakes. You need to be able to walk into the den of lions and let them know that you're the boss. Does that make sense? So the seed, if the illness is bad and if the suffering is uncomfortable, that means that seed is likely sitting in some unpleasant location. And if you're very soft and you never hurt anyone, you're going to be eaten alive. So it's not that so I'm suggesting that one become familiar with one's own ability to wreak a little havoc. And I'm not suggesting that we become bad people. And I'm not suggesting that we ever do anything that would hurt others or ourselves or anybody. What I'm suggesting is to recognize your potential to do so. Realize that if you had grown up in Nazi Germany in the 20s or something like that, oh, you sent me that. Okay. Oh gosh. Whew. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm seeing the chats as they're coming in. If you had grown up in Nazi Germany in the 20s, in the 30s, 20s and 30s, and been like 20, the early 40s, in your 20s, you may have just made the choices that the people made. You may have. You need to realize that. We always think, oh no, if I had done it, I would be different. Not necessarily. Not necessarily. These things, they arise as a sort of a collective function. So it's very important to understand that the potential is there, but also, and this is the important point, as humans, we have a skill set, we have this ability to witness our experience and our behavior. Yes, the potential is to live life like an angel and never ever make any mistakes. And the potential is to make a lot of mistakes. But the decision that we make is to find our balance and our root in being. And then from being, be able to harness all those potentials in a way that promotes evolution, that supports life, that aligns better and better and better with our own balance, our cosmic balance and a cosmic intention like that. So it's a matter of making moral decisions. It's a matter of taking responsibility. It's a matter of functioning with integrity. Those are the choices that one has to make. And hopefully no one will ever have to make the choices that the people in the last century had to make in various parts of Europe. God bless Europe for having gone through that in the first place and provided a living example to our world so that we will never make those mistakes again. It's going out to the collective. There are signs. This is going out to the collective. It's a warning. It's a warning to the collective. And I'm just feeling it. I'm just feeling it and 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 feeling it. There's some imbalance in the collective. I think it was mentioned this morning that the US government just shut down. Chaos. Welcome to chaos. So when the chaos comes in, different people react differently. We are finding our balance. We find our balance in the chaos. It's time to do a healing for the whole world because US government also has power in other parts of the world and the world looks to the US to provide certain resources and so forth. So it's just, we're creating that balance in there. And all it is our collective stabilized in its own point of balance is able to radiate the physically through our being in our bodies, radiate the state of balance to the collective, from our collective, in a way that supports as many people as possible, responding to the chaos in a balanced manner. Responsibility, morally sound decisions, and integrity. Those three. And I'm actually feeling it moving down in the whole stomach, gut area. that's where the communication is taking place. That's where the radiance of the wisdom is taking place, to provide it as a gut feeling. A gut feeling. I will take responsibility. I can make a good decision. For everyone. Okay, let's look at some more questions. I have so many questions, you guys. Thank you for all the amazing questions. I'm going to get to all of them, I promise. Let's see, that's my question and answer box up there. Okay, here, there's a question about cords. Are cords part of our eternal soul? And this is why they continue life after life. We were talking last night a little bit about the level of creation. The part of the z-axis, it's more like strings. And the nagas, the forms of intelligence that oversee the various systems of the body and so forth. And the cord of light that runs through the physiology. And if you check yesterday's webinar, you'll see there was a nice healing in there for, I believe, for the cord of light, if I can still remember. All right, so I was looking at that. And I looked at it. It's very nice, you guys, that we do these sessions and we do them in waking consciousness, then we look at them in dream consciousness and then in sleep consciousness. And this profound question I was looking at in sleep consciousness last night. And what I saw, so beautiful. It's so illuminating to the mechanics of how these forms of creation function. You've got the cord of light. And the cord of light, because it is living force. It is living force running right through the body. And it connects to infinity at both ends, actually. Because in our bodies, it connects us to the center of the earth. It thus grounds us and anchors us into our living life, into our life. Also, from Earth's core, she has her own extensions of that go to the planets and to the center sun and to the center of the galaxy and so like that. So it eventually goes to the center of the center of the center of the center in that direction. Out the top crown of the head, it goes out to divinity. So it's almost like a cord, you could say, that's running the length of the y-axis, right? That's going from infinity to infinity. However, in the human form, what it does is it makes a little self-referral loop. So you've got this cord that's infinity at this end and infinity at that end. And when it gets into our body, it's like, oh, this is a spot that I love. And it goes like this, and it makes a loop that literally is our astral bodies. Here, layers of the physiology, astral body right there. It literally is the astral body. So each person, and lots of things have, I mean, you know, plants, flowers have astral bodies, and animals, and there are actually astral structures. They're beings who the most manifest level of their body is at the astral level. So that's where you get a loop like this, and it loops a cord, a naga, and it loops on itself without there being a physical form to associate with. So they're beings like that. And from our point of absolute fullness, absolute totality, all that is contained in the self. Because this whole field that I'm talking about, it's all you. This is your field, infinite field of consciousness, and these are some of the road markers to help you identify where you are in the field so that you can navigate your way around. That's important. Okay, here's another question coming in from here. Thank you, I hope that answered the question. All right, this is it. Regarding axes, psychosis, etc. Sometimes psychoses can appear in the same as higher levels of consciousness regarding delusions, hallucinations, etc., or perceiving higher subtle realms and beings such as angels, etc. Right? Can you address this too? Yes, and that ties into actually two other things. That ties into another question that I got from Europe that I want to answer today. Oh, here's another question. I didn't get to read that question yet, but we'll go to this other one. Okay, so yes, because a lot of times what's happened is people who, particularly in past centuries, who are having amazing experiences of subtle perceptions, for example. In fact, Ma, is it true that I had an aunt who saw angels and was eventually put in a insane asylum because she saw angels? No. That was, so you said I had an aunt who'd see fairies and stuff like that. No? Okay, she doesn't remember. It's okay. So, yeah. So what would happen was in centuries past, if people had perceptions of subtler levels of creation, because it wasn't the physical material which dominates our awareness, people were like, well, you must be crazy. Too bad. And a lot of those people ended up living not very happy lives because they were discarded by society, which is unfortunate. But not in this day and age. And so the difference is whether this is, okay, let me just go back and look at this again. This question, I'm going to reframe the question just a little bit to fit the diagram that we've got going, okay? So we can sort of fit it into the context. We've got the x-axis from hell to heaven. And then we've got this a-axis, the a-axis, which has to do with levels of heightened awareness, like how high is the awareness, how rich is the awareness, how full is the awareness. And if you have that deep fullness of awareness down at the hellish end of creation, the individual experiences darkness with such detail that it crushes the soul. It crushes the soul. If you have that beautiful heightened awareness, and that's where you get like psychosis and mental illness. If you get that very heightened level of awareness up at the heavenly end of the x-axis, then you get people who are having like really high levels of experience. As humans, our potential is the whole thing, right? The important thing is this really, in a sense, validates or gives meaning to those individuals who could be living very difficult existences down at the lower end of that spectrum. That the reason their souls chose that experience was they had to go deeply into those areas in order to pick out those seeds. They had to pick out those seeds. And so what our nature as humans is to be a little bit weaselly. We just want to be comfortable. We just want to be happy all the time. We don't want to go anywhere dark or yucky, right? So a lot of times, not everybody, but a lot of times, some people are like, bring it. But most people are not. Most people are like, please make me as comfortable as possible. So the tendency is, if there's a choice, to move towards the sweeter, lighter end of that spectrum and to stay there if possible. But that's not our job as humans. And what will happen is if the soul stays over there a lot, and it's like, well, I'm not looking at that over there. First you get a backache, right? Because we're hiding something back there, something dark that's not happy. But then after a while, if that's not addressed, things go from bad to worse, and the backache becomes problems, with it becomes extensive medical problems, becomes I can't go to work, I'm losing my work time because I can't go there because of the back, and then after a while I don't have my job, and then I want still to escape, so I'm going to drink because I don't want to deal with my problems that I'm having and I lost my job, and then now because I'm drinking I'm not treating anybody nicely, so I lost my wife, and now and it just the whole thing crumbles. It just crumbles. And the more the person avoids that, the more it crumbles, the more their life crumbles. So yes, we have the potential to stay in the heavenly realms of creation, but this is not the human potential. This is the human potential. So the key is to maintain balance. Maintain balance. Know that if the situation calls for it, if my responsibility and my moral index indicates, I can function like an angel, and I will, and I'm willing to face problems and to function like that. And if the situation calls for it, I can put on my shielding and my energetic weapons in hand, and I can move into that darker area, and I can root out that source of that problem. And the darkness will fear me. That's what you want. You can still be adorable and sweet and fearsome at the same time. That's what we're doing in energy healing. And that's what people mean when they talk about embracing your shadow side or embracing your dark. That's what they mean. They mean being able to do that and to be all right with it and accept that I can create a little havoc too. So if you, darkness, think you're going to create havoc in my life, you better watch out, because I can too. And it makes you a little scary. You might be a little scary sometimes, but that's okay. That's really okay to do that. It's not that you ever would hurt somebody. It's just that if you need to. Sweet and fearsome. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So that ties into this question from England. So I want to catch all the little spots that tie into this question. So here's her question. She awoke and was shown a benign tumor deep in the armpit, right armpit. It's not physical, but it's like the seed of a tumor. It's the seed. She could see the molecules and that she could rearrange them at will. Beautiful. She's guessing it's in some level of her being that she's not normally conscious, of which she is not normally conscious, but was shown this in order to heal it fully so that it will thereby not manifest. And then she went deeper. Good girl. Good. Good, my dear. Good. Good. Goddess of Scotland. Good for you. So, and she saw, when she went deeper, she saw herself as little, kind of like arching and like not comfortable and wanting to kind of break away or get out of a situation. And then she saw a man running away from stuff he didn't want to acknowledge, right? We just covered that point. And a woman who was on a bicycle riding around trying to find that stuff so that she could deal with it. And of course, the bicycle kind of represents doing it, but sort of doing it the hard way, right? The slow way, and it's a lot of effort, and so like that. So yeah, so if you've got the husband who's not, he's being the weasel, right? He doesn't want to face his situations that are difficult, and so he'd rather come home from work at the end of the day and just, pull out a beer or something and forget about it. Just forget about it. Tomorrow, wake up with a bit of a hangover and go in and face it all again, not completely efficiently and not completely comfortably or whatever. And so then the wife is like trying to pick up the pieces where the husband isn't willing. He isn't willing, and it's hard. And it seems like a trap. And it's not a surprise that could happen, whether it's your parents or your grandparents or your great-grandparents. The point is that usually the corruption that comes into the DNA, which gives rise to cancer, is a byproduct of, it's at the molecular level. So that means ancestors. So I would say you definitely went in and you found the deeper cause that was behind it. And we actually, as you can see, we have been addressing that here with this whole discussion about embracing your shadow side or whatever, embracing your dark side. So this obviously needs to extend to the ancestors for everybody. And if we can integrate this information at a molecular level, that means with lots of help from the healing that we just did in the gut area, then that will allow it means the way the intestines, the way the gut extracts the information, there's a certain degree of intelligence required to extract specific nutrients from the food that will be more life-supporting, that have more prana in them. If, for example, oh, thank you, this is for several people. If, for example, the gut can shift a little bit its orientation to extracting primarily based on the idea of the food that's most nutritionally rich, and bring in the added principle of food that is energetically rich, that if there's a choice, because we're going to get enough nutritional value from our food, if we're making good choices up at this end, that if the being can favor food that's emotionally rich, that's energetically rich, the food that has the highest intelligence value in it. I'm looking. This is a healing for everyone and our ancestors. To shift the focus of what is important priorities, to reprioritize what we take home from our life experience. And what I'm feeling happening is an offering of how to measure what is energetically rich. Because for a lot of physiologies, it hasn't been a consideration, particularly through the ancestral lines, it hasn't been a consideration. And therefore, sorry, I'm still reeling from that one message that came in. I just learned that one of our attendees just passed away. Just throwing that out there. Sorry, so I'm speaking of energetically. It's not always emotionally the easiest thing. It's not always the most emotionally easy. But that's, I think, where the rubber meets the road on this healing, is in order to make the discriminating choice in the gut, which is the most supportive of our highest health, that it's important to not be afraid to make the decision which is emotionally difficult. More stabilization of the capacity to witness the experience in the level of the gut, so there isn't that feeling of I'm overwhelmed. We need to find balance. So I'm seeing balance is being produced by everyone's physiologies at a very, very fine level, at a very deep level of being. We're producing balance as an ointment, balance as an energy medicine, balance as a manifestation of self. And what I'm seeing is balance residing at many, many levels, from smaller than the smallest to bigger than the biggest. Balance residing from, on this axis, it's smack in the middle. But on this axis, it goes, on this axis, smack in the middle goes up and down. And on this axis, smack in the middle goes forward and back, right? And on that A-axis, the A-axis has balance at every point, but just to differing degrees of comprehension and intensity. So that's the axis we're working with in this healing. We're upping the balance quotient in the A-axis. Oh, that's interesting. You know, this A-axis the Z-axis just came up in the last week or so, and the A-axis just came up after that as a option in our landscape. And now we get to work with it. And it's such an honor and such a privilege for me, you guys, to get to really start to work with it in a very powerful and effective way in this group with all of us. That's so, so cool. So that's what we're doing. It's within the context of so here what we're seeing is the A-axis is a very important player in the healing function. Because once you can see it, once awareness can see all the way from like deepest, darkest, deep sleep, I have no awareness at all, up to full, complete awareness, full, complete enlightenment, the perception of the universe from the perspective of God, right? Just like complete. From that wider, brighter perspective, the answer that comes back is the balance is present at every point, but also in this manifest field where our bodies are, we need a little bit of play in the wheel, because it's the play in the wheel that is fundamental to the manifestation of this world. So I'm asking a question back to being, into our wise group. I'm asking the question back into the being of our wholeness. Then, is it possible for the stability of balance, the totality of balance, the wholeness of balance to stretch out across this x-axis? So if the balance point was here, we'll put my jewelry, there we go. Okay, so this X marks the spot here. The bracelets mark the spot of balance. Is it possible to do this with the balance? Oh, I love it that I wore these bracelets. How perfect. My mom made these bracelets. Aren't they lovely? So do you see what I'm saying? That if absolute balance, instead of being one bracelet, can, or being one skinny bracelet, could say stretch out and be a broad base bracelet, then we would have wiggle room in the x-axis so that we can function efficiently, successfully, powerfully, capably. If it could, what if it could stretch all the way out, right? This is what we want to do with it, right? We want to stretch it all the way to infinity on both ends, so that full awareness, like biggest awareness, so that absolute balance is not lost at any point in the along the x-axis. This is completely new stuff, you guys. Like, nobody's even thought of it. Nobody's even thought of it. It came out of the intelligence of our group. So amazing. Okay, I've got 3 more questions up here. And then I've also got a bunch of stuff coming in on the chat. And I know the chat is coming in like more sort of immediate. So let me just take one more question in the question answer box. What I'm thinking of doing, guys, for the future is maybe we'll do all our questions through the chat box. It might be easier. It might work better for me. Since Zoom has changed everything now, it's like the dynamics of the chat box and the question answer box are different than they were before. So I'll talk to Tom about that, and we'll figure out what will be most useful for everybody. But I'm going to take one more from my question and answer box because it's open, and then we'll go to the chat box and see what we've got going on in there. So can you speak about the difference between chakra and marma? The word chakra, this is my understanding, and these are ancient words, and they're part of a very, very ancient tradition of understanding the body energetically. So I'm not actually as much of an expert on it as some people. I think some people have like studied all the ancient texts, and they, you know, I'm coming almost purely from the level of direct experience. For example, my awareness of the Mahamarmas was born during a workshop in Walnut Creek last year. I was just sitting there in the workshop in front of like all these people, and I suddenly saw everyone's Mahamarmas. I'm like, wow, there seem to be like 3 main energy centers in the body. Then later, after I saw that, I discovered, oh yeah, there's something called Mahamarmas. They have names: Basti Mahamarma, Ridya Mahamarma. I think it's Stadana Mahamarma in the head, something like that. I'll send it. Yeah, so anyway, so same thing, that I'm not the full expert, but my understanding is, and for those of you who are more expert than I, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the chakras refer to energy centers in the physiology that reside at these points. You know, there's 7 in the torso area: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then I also understand that there are chakras that are out the crown of the head, and I've heard different healers talk about different numbers of them. Like, so I know one guy that goes up to hundreds, but my experience with them is that they become sort of like, they remind me of the overtone series in music, that when you first start, you've got a fundamental, then you've got the octave, then you've got the fifth, then you've got the third, then you've got the next octave. Like, no, so you've got the octave, then the fifth, then the octave, then the third, then the, you know, like that. And they get closer, 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 closer together. So that's also same as these chakras. And if you look at your body, it's similar, because if you look at the distance between the root chakra and then the one that's just below the navel, it's a pretty big distance, you know, like that. But then from the navel to the solar plexus is less, and from the solar plexus to the heart is less, and from the heart to the throat is less, and from the throat to here, I guess that's about that much. But then from here to here is also, that's not as far, right? So as they go up, they get smaller. So I only tend to count up to about 12. Occasionally, maybe something goes to 13, but because they're getting smaller, that's what happens. Okay, marmas. Oh, and also chakras are where the energy of the y-axis rolls in on itself. It's circling on itself all the time. So in these places, they're like portals into the subtler levels of self as well. The marmas seem to be overseen, the chakras are overseen by Devata, by packages of intelligence. Marmas also. There are a lot more marmas in the body. Ayurveda recognizes like at least, I think, 107. And there are also secondary chakras. There's like a chakra of the mouth, and there's a chakra right here, and so forth. When I look at them, they're not dissimilar, but I feel that the cycle, right now, I'm going to say, I think I might do a little bit more investigation into this question. It's a simple question, but I think it's possible that there's more than this. But right now, I'm going to say that marmas are very much like chakras in that the energy is accessible through the whole y-axis in the marma points. I also feel that there's more of an orientation toward the subtle in the marma points, whereas the chakras are more, I would say, balanced. They're more like in the middle, and they're more active at the relative than at the finer levels. I think I have to think about that question. I'll think about it. It may even come up more in this webinar. Oh God, we're getting to the end, and we've also got the chat. So I'm going to the chat window now, guys. We're going to bang through the chat. And there's also 2 questions still in the question box too, but let's see what we've got. Thank you. I'm going to skip over the ones that aren't questions, okay, guys, because I know you're talking to each other, and I love that. I'll just read through them if it's not a question. I started as an angel in this creation and manifested to the terrestrial levels to help Ram and Sita in ancient India. Many people have looked at me as one with mental conditions. No, not true. I realized I wanted to be Brahman rather than adore Brahman. Being human seems so much more. We didn't really talk a lot about simultaneous parallel universes in this session, and we're coming to our end, but we did more in yesterday's session. And the reality is that when it's your reality, it's reality. It's reality for you, and that reality it forms who and what you are. So there's no part of me, and there shouldn't, for anybody, there's no point, there's no judgment on anything. Absolutely, if this is your reality and this is what you did, well, God bless you. That's all I can say. God bless you. And thank you for being with us. And thank you for bringing your vast experience in this area, because I know this person also, it's to all panelists. I know he also works with angels. He does healing now with angels a lot. So that makes sense that you started as an angel and you work with angels and you help. So bless you. Yes, if other axes are free to choose balance, meaning that it's not just automatic, maybe. Yes, basically also in energy healing, we're using our own autonomy to work with, we decide that maybe it's time to have balance. Because I think what happened in the past is people weren't even aware of these axes, and there was no thought of, oh wow, I should find a balance on the x-axis. Nobody even thought that thought. So what happened is people would just get gripped They just get gripped in some area and they're like, well, this is my reality. You know, so now we know, now we see the landscape, the lights are on in the room, it's not dark anymore. We can see where all the furniture is and where the doors and windows are, and we can decide, you know, now I choose balance. I choose to take responsibility. Does that mean having a larger expanded perspective? Yes. Yes. It means that as we're going along, every single thing we do causes expansion to the perspective. And that is, it seems like a small point, but it's really key. That expansion of perspective, that expansion of consciousness, expansion of intelligence. Oh, I say that so Americanly, don't I? For the Europeans, expansion, the expansion of consciousness, the expansion of consciousness. It is the power of humanity. It is what we offer to the creation as valuable. Something that's valuable at every level of creation. It's valuable to the angels. It's valuable to the demons. It's valuable to the mother of the universe who's bigger than any of it. It's valuable to every aspect of creation that we embody that expansion. We embody, and I talked a lot about the hero's journey yesterday, we embody the dynamics of the transformation process, the transformation process. Thank you. You all speak so beautifully. That is Christ's harrowing hell. That is absolute balance and full awareness at all possible points in the x-axis as you just described it. And it looks like that comment got clipped. And she's saying she was responding to the A-axis being balanced at every point. I think it depends on how you define balance. If balance is described as awakened awareness, I'd say the A-axis isn't balanced in that, like each of the axes has a certain kind of balance in it, through it, all the way through it, and other areas where it doesn't have balance, right? So one of the things we're doing in order to expand our own consciousness is to find balance, find a way of integrating that balance at every point, on every axis. I hope that helps. I'm going through these kind of slow, fast. Also, I'm seeing, oh, I see. I'm only seeing the ones that are to me. So I'll keep going because I know there are more points in here. Sorry, that question is in relation to, whoa, something just happened. Okay, is in relation to the bracelets. Right. I think we need more time to understand the play of the axes. Yeah, making choices through balance and experiences of subtle dimensions. I definitely agree. I'm going to see if I can open. No, I can't do that. I'm still getting used to this new thing. Okay, so let's go back. I think there's still, what are we? We're over our time. We have 2 more questions. I'm just going to see if it's possible to answer them quickly. If it's not, I'm more than happy to upload the questions as videos or to answer them to you through emails or whatever. Yes, this is what I mean. People with high experiences thought to be crazy. Sometimes it still happens, yeah. Would you recommend that we have more experience, balance, and depth of experience in our energy healing ability before we attempt to go into our shadow side of ourself? I have gone into locating seeds and was able to balance them, but the aftermath of the experience was very uncomfortable in my life. For a day or 2 afterwards, because of this, I've decided not to go into this again. Okay, that's a really good point. And also, you guys should know this comes from a lady who's like very experienced working with consciousness. So actually, the answer came up in yesterday's webinar. And it was actually a healing for everyone. So everyone will receive. And again, this comes from this, just was born out of an energy healing that took place in the last week, a private session. And that was that it is absolutely possible to manifest and create the antidote to the problem or the healing for the seed before actually uncovering the seed of entropy, or the seed of corruption, or the seed of illness. It's possible to structure, I'm saying it again, it's possible to structure the healing or the solution before coming to the seed. And what that means is that grace attends. Grace attends the process. And as far as good to evolve one's shadow side first, I can tell you, my dear, you're already miles ahead. But there are people all over the world right now who are doing exercises and workshops and so forth to develop their shadow sides, and they don't even know anything about transcending. They've never even transcended. They don't know anything about consciousness, or they don't know that they know anything about consciousness. So it's never too late. It's never too late to comfortably explore that area, and there are actually a lot of resources out in the field of the relative for that. However, I'd like to say that the resources I know of may or may not be approaching with the level of delicacy or sensitivity that I feel would be appropriate for us. Because we're working at a level which is, we have understandings in our group here that a lot of the people that are running the workshops do not, if that makes sense. And I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm saying use your discrimination, go in with discrimination and cherry pick through and pick out what works for you, because not all of it's going to be appropriate. But that's okay, because we are pioneers basically in what we're doing. And so yes, and oh, beautiful, oh gosh, and lots of points coming up here to all panelists. He's saying, yes, can it be healed first in a parallel universe, then moved into our body here? Yes, and that's what our goddess of Scotland was doing today. She was finding it in a parallel universe where it had not yet manifested and healing it in the parallel universe. Also support from today's session. As much as we can, always, we're always behind you. We're behind everyone and supporting everyone. Yeah, and then heal it there. And then it doesn't manifest in this body. Beautiful. All right, everybody. I think I answered all the questions. And I think we covered everything. Thank you so much to everyone for being with me today and for staying a few extra minutes. That was really, it's obvious that this whole area has a lot more potential to explore. So I look forward to diving into even deeper levels with everyone. Oh, and I didn't answer your question. So, okay. And a thanks going out to my dear husband, and a thanks, and I will address the lady who put the hearts up. Thank you, I love you, and I'm sorry I didn't get to your question. I hadn't read it earlier, I'm sorry, because everything happened fast this morning. So maybe I'll do an extra video. I'll do a video just for you. Thank you so much for being with me. Big hugs go out to everyone. Looking forward to being in Northern California in March, and see you all soon.